Let me see. All right. I don't know what it did before. It wouldn't let it do that. All right. I just need, so Alden, so Ron, just check Alden's sound. I need to pull up a video.
Let me hear you count, Alden.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
You sound fine to me, Alden.
Thank you.
Alden, how are you feeling?
You know, like I have lingering COVID.
It's so fun. I have not had it yet. It's so odd.
That's how I feel. It's tired and coffee and blah.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to just check sound. All right. I'm going to admit everyone and we will get started. Hi, everyone. Hope you are well and good and have had a happy Thanksgiving. Today we have, it was a little, the Hebrew word for mistake is ta'ut or fashla, I guess in Arabic, like a mix up or a jumble, but it's going to work to your benefit. So we actually have 2 classes scheduled for today. The conclusion of the Stars and Stripes and the Star of David, looking at American history and the birth of the state of Israel. And we've the beginning of the Soul of Shabbat with the amazing Alden Salavi, who joined us in the fall for a high holiday class that I told him changed my perspectives and gave me a deeper understanding of the high holidays. He is with us today. So I'm going to take the first couple of minutes just to conclude the November 29th class, show a little bit of a video and talk about what we've learned. So I'm going to start with the video. And this is just a few minutes of the video. This is just a few minutes of a video that's about the literal day, November 29th, 1947, and the days leading up to it. What you know, if you are American, you know, I am guessing your week last week was a lighter week. I was away. You might have had less on your calendar. You might have relaxed more, caught up more, refreshed a little bit, maybe had a less, or maybe had a more intense week because you were cooking and welcoming in relatives from town or getting on a plane and visiting people. But Thanksgiving week is for sure different in the American experience, and it's not a regular week, and it's not a week you really want to deal with a lot of work, for sure. Any work you do is cooking and preparing and making plans with family. But on November 29th, 1947, that was Thanksgiving week. And it was also a snowy time in New York, and Lake Success, where the UN was at the time, was the location. So you're dealing with the vibe of Thanksgiving week in the United States, where a lot of people don't work, with the weather and with the tension that is going on with this vote. So what I'm going to do is just share a few minutes of people who are eyewitnesses and at that, in the room where it happens, if you want to think of that term from Hamilton, at that UN vote, you'll get a little bit of inside baseball about that moment. And then I'll wrap up the November 29th Stars and Stripes and the Star of David class. And then we'll start with Alden Salavi. So let me share this and just give me a thumbs up that you can hear the sound once I start it. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound. Thank you. Fabulous.
The minutes of Britain's mandate are ticking to an end, but the nations are still deliberating over the future of the Holy Land.
Palestine in 1947 had reached its boiling point. 30 years had passed since the Balfour Declaration announced Britain's support for a national home for the Jewish people. Hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees, survivors of the horrors of the Shoah, were trying to make their way to Palestine, but Britain had shut the gates to immigration. The Jewish underground movement's increased military actions to force the British out.
The British were fed up, and they had passed on the problem of the partition of Palestine to a United Nations committee in UNSCOP who were deliberating. Nobody really believed in our day the UN was a place where you deliberated and deliberated. They never did anything. They talked a lot.
The United Nations Committee recommended an end to the British mandate and the partition of Palestine into two states, an Arab state and a Jewish state, and scheduled a vote in the UN General Assembly at Lake Success, New York. A two-thirds majority was required to pass the proposal. Despite the support of both the United States and the Soviet Union, many other countries needed to be convinced.
You spoke to the Belgian, and you spoke to the Swede, and you spoke to the Brazilian, preaching, explaining why all the time. The refugees and the displaced people, they call them displaced person in Europe.
There were a number of us working at the same time also on getting votes.
A preliminary vote showed the Jewish agency delegation coming up short. The diplomatic team focused their efforts on three countries that were still undecided: Liberia, Haiti, and the Philippines.
יום אחד אנחנו מקבלים צלצול מהמטה של ההגנה בפריז. הייתה הוראה לחפש בלונדון איזה גוי, והאיש הזה דיבר עם נשיא הפיליפינים, שהבטיח לו להצביע בעד, והנה מתברר שהשגריר שלהם בלייק סקסס, הוא לא קיבל הוראה. מצאנו אותו, זה היה כבר מאוחר בלילה. התחלנו להסביר לו שהנשיא לא עמד בדיבורו, והיה שקט, אז התחלנו לשאול מה קרה. אז הוא אומר, תשמע, אני חושב, I'm thinking. מה אתה חושב עכשיו ב3 בבוקר? הוא אומר, אני חושב איזה שעה עכשיו בפיליפינים. ובסוף הייתה שיחה עם נשיא הפיליפינים, והוא הובטח שהשגריר שלו יקבל הוראה.
It was touch and go all the time till you got everything lined up.
Haiti, of all countries, was the last country come to vote. We sent down to Haiti a Protestant minister by the name of Sheldon, who was also believed that the Jews should have a homeland. They went down for 2 or 3 days, and on Wednesday before Thanksgiving, they came back and they said, Haiti will vote with us.
Some people promised and voted against. Some people were pursued by us till the last minute and voted for.
Diplomacy continued up until the vote itself was held.
And there was a South American country, I don't want to tell you which, so our head of the Latin group, an Argentinian Jew who was in the Mishlah, he went to the men's room and he recognized the men's shoes under the door. And he knocked and he said, you promised to vote, they are voting now. I'm here to bring you to the voting. And he voted.
This was Saturday night. So somebody explained it can't be Friday night because En Mashiach Ba B'Shabbat.
Of course, we huddled around the radio, which was only a battery radio, and kept conking out.
כל השולחנות והספסלים אל מול הרדיו, אנחנו שוכבים על השולחנות, מתים מעייפות. היו יומיים בלי שינה, היה קרב באמצע.
Jews throughout the world held their breath in anticipation.
Those who are in favor will say yes, those who are against will say no. And the abstainers always, they know what to say.
They went through the vote.
We will start with that. Afghanistan?
We were keeping score.
No. Argentina?
On a radio in the office.
ואני זוכר מאוד את הקולות של גואטמלה, yes, ארגנטינה, abstention, Lebanon, no.
Yugoslavia and Spain. United Kingdom and Spain.
כשהגענו לאות פי, פיליפינים, אמרו כן, אז ידענו שאנחנו עשינו איזה, תרמנו משהו.
בעד! פלוס. נגד. מינוס.
I remember the excitement. This was our life.
Yeah?
At one point, we made it.
The resolution of the Dutch Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
After the vote, people were crying, people were embracing.
ואז יצאו כולם ויצאנו כולנו לרחבה המרכזית של העיר.
They were dancing in the streets. Even the British. I remember one of them came by in a tank, picked up some kids, take them on a ride around.
The British soldier on guard was relieved. He knew, thank God, there's going to be an end to all this. And we said, now let's go into town. So we got a lift on the back of a British armored carrier with a gun. But now we're all pals.
We sat in the car, Charette, my husband and myself, from Lake Success to Manhattan, and nobody said a word.
And we'll stop there. Hold on. So, a very dramatic time for the Jewish people. Obviously, it was not easy, and it was not a given at all. And I think that's one of the most important things that I've learned in preparing for this class, is how not a given it was at all, and actually how things could have gone very differently on a couple of levels. They could have gone much earlier. There could have been a state earlier, because as we talked about in the first class, there were people as early as the 1600s. In addition to the homeland, and if you want to go back to biblical texts, people in the 1600s who, thought that the Jewish people should have a state. Balfour Declaration, in 1939, we know what's happening. So it's a very, Dan gave this beautiful Devar Torah on Thanksgiving, or Thanksgiving Shabbat, about being happy and sad at the same time. And I think a lot of the creation of the state is happy and sad at the same time. Like, we're so happy there's a state, but like there would have been 6 million more Jews plus countless others that were there. And I highly recommend it. I'll put it in the chat after Alden starts teaching, The Ark of a Covenant, which informed a lot of my work for this class. It's by Walter Russell Mead. It's an excellent book, and anyone can borrow it. I'm done with it now with the month. But there's an excellent podcast interview, and I'll put the link in the chat. And I don't think he says it directly in the book, but Mead says it in the podcast, that like Truman never was like, yes, let's there be a Jewish state. It was always in response to people coming to him, to Weitzman or to others, but he was never the driver of that bus, but reacted well. But as we learned last time, or 2 classes ago, or 2 weeks ago, is in 1946, after the Morrison-Grady plan, there was nothing. There was really nothing. And it's very complicated. And the more it's nice to stay on the surface and not to know all the intricacies. And once you see how much more nuanced and complicated it was, you can't unsee it. And it's disturbing. And there was not always a lot of nobility. And even some of the things in the creation of state are playing out today. The rabbinate did not have the Rav Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel, had a different understanding of the role of the rabbinate in the Jewish state than those, who have been since him. And it's played out to a lot of complexity. And, as we can see right now, as the new government again is formed, that there's a lot of complexity. And, as I wrote in the Shabbat message last week, with another bombing in Israel, that there's always happy and sad that's there. But none of this takes away my Zionism, my love for the state of Israel. And I'm just willing to ride that that roller coaster with her. And I'd much rather there be a state than any day before November 29th, 1947. So it's really been amazing to study that period of time. And it's such a beautiful segue. For those who came in late, we're ending the November 29th class and beginning the Soul of Shabbat with Alden Salovey. And so it's beautiful in a way that there is a state for him to live in, to reside in, and flourish in. And I'll share with you his bio. And I just want to say, and I said this to Alden on the phone when we spoke yesterday, is that I've heard about him and we've been in touch, before COVID, but I never really learned with him before. And he's just eye-opening in terms of like helping us understand liturgy and what's going on in the Jewish world and how it reflects and how we express ourselves. His poetry is so beautiful. I'll put his website, which has his bio on it, and other resources as well. It's just a pleasure to have him back. We had him right before the high holidays, and he really changed my perspective of the high holidays. And now we have him for the next 4 weeks with his class, The Soul of Shabbat. So Alden Salovey spreads joy and excitement for prayer. A liturgist and poet, his work has been used by people of many faiths throughout the world. He's written more than 900 pieces of new liturgy, offering a fresh Jewish voice, challenging the boundaries between poetry, meditation, personal growth, storytelling, and prayer. He's a writer, a teacher, a writing coach, an award-winning essayist and journalist, and liturgist in residence at Pardes Institute of Jewish Study. His writing was transformed by multiple tragedies, marked in 2009 by the sudden death of his wife from a catastrophic brain injury. As a result, he deepened his exploration of meditation, poetry, liturgy, and personal prayer as a healing spiritual practice. And he's one of the master poet liturgists that is out there. He has many books, including his 6th book, These Words, Poetic Midrash and the Language of Torah, also from the CCAR Press. And I will put the whole link in the bio so you can explore his website. He holds a BA in English composition, a minor from Beloit College, and an MA in journalism from the University of Illinois in Springfield, and an MBA in economics and finance from the University of Chicago. And so Alden, and he's battling COVID right now. So we just are really appreciative we're not in the room with him, but we're really hoping that you have a refreshed, Lema, speedy and complete recovery. So with that, Alden, I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you for that lovely invitation. Welcome. I think I recognize several faces from the Mysteries of the Machzor class. So to those who I've learned with before, welcome, and to new folks, welcome as well. I'm going to do my best to turn the mic off or maybe even the video when I start coughing, which is bound to happen. I'm just fresh into COVID, so but COVID and Zoom seem to go so well together. I did not want to give up the opportunity to teach and keep on point. Those of you who've learned with me before also know that I'm as adult learners, you're welcome to camera on, camera off, but to the extent that you are comfortable with your camera on, it's always a more engaging experience for me to see as many faces as possible. So that that would be lovely as well. And I hope this will be as interactive as we can be, because Shabbat is a liturgy, but it's also an experience. And we can't experience Shabbat alone. So I'm going to try to beckon you into the conversation from time to time. So why don't I start just by moving from the political history of Israel realm into the Shabbat realm with a brief meditation from my first CCAR press book, This Grateful Heart, called Shabbat Settles on Jerusalem. Shabbat settles on Jerusalem, like a dove, gliding on silent wings. Shabbat settles in my heart, a lover with open arms, embracing my soul with song, wrapped in quiet breathing. I send blessings into the world, light, bread, prayers of peace. Shabbat is a powerful concept, perhaps so powerful that we can say it's been adopted by other world religions. Maybe even it's not too much of a stretch to say that the secular world has adopted the concept of the weekend or a time to behave differently or a separated time, which is an echo of Shabbat. Clearly, there is a unifying set of concepts and practices and memories across all sectors of Jewish life. The liturgy, with certain exceptions, is the same. There's even a website called, it's actually a website application called Shabbat.com, where one can find a home to have a Shabbat meal with someone else anywhere in the world. Powerful concept. So let's start with memories. And I'm going to call on you. What are your favorite practices, memories, songs, activities of Shabbat? Let's can we get a couple of folks raise a hand? Just Rabbi, you've got a hand raised.
So most in the Zoom may not have been there. Some may have. We just started, our head of our religious school and some clergy started a Shabbat Unplugged. And we have two campuses. We have a vet campus out west, and they started, it's for like religious school age, once a month on a Friday in the cooler months in Florida, which is winter. And it's an outdoor service, started kind of in the post-COVID era. So it's outdoors, which is amenable. Each month there's a theme, like 80s music, 90s music, and the prayers are sent to the liturgy. And I've only been twice, but Rabbi Greg and Heather, some of our other clergy staff, and there's such a huge turnout. It's so enjoyable and festive. We give a snack, and like there's food so the kids aren't hungry and they can run around after. And I go and I'm like, God, I wish this existed for me as a kid. It's such a kid-friendly worship. So I'm not there actually that often, but I'm so, and when people are thinking about joining the temple, I'm so happy to direct them there. And the other thing is, I'll say in our Schaefer campus, our main sanctuary, on Friday night, we laugh because we have a lot of clergy, and some Friday, clergy can be off, and a lot of us don't want off. Like, we love being in the sanctuary and worshiping. Like, I truly, and it's so funny to watch, God willing, you'll be with us in person one day. Like, I've seen this a couple times over the years I've been here, when a guest speaker comes to speak, and I'm so focused on like their content and the logistics and all that. And then they're like, oh my God, this service is amazing. Like, it's just musical and beautiful and warm and welcoming. And so, even if I didn't work here, I'd want to pray here. I mean, that's my experience of Shabbat, both, in a couple different ways at Bethel. We have a lot of regular Shabbat goers here, so including people who are on the religious activities committee. So there are definitely people who can speak to it. If they'll unmute and talk, is up to them. Philip, go ahead. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, he has COVID, but I thought I wanted to say something about COVID. During COVID, I was not coming up there. Bethel was a huge thing for me, as you probably mostly know. And but what I was doing was I was lighting my candles, and I have a little collar roll. And I watched Central Synagogue from New York from 6 to 6:30. Then I watched the Day Synagogue from New York from 6:30 to 7:30. Then I watched Bethel from 7:30 till 9:30. So I had a whole night of it, and it was kind of wonderful. You didn't have to worry about driving. And to the point that now before I come up there, even now I watch Central Synagogue from New York from 6 to 6:30. Because it's wonderful, and we're doing a lot of the music this Friday. The choir is going to be doing a lot of Kabbalah Shabbat songs that they sing. And they do really do some wonder, and it's just a whole wonderful experience. So, as awful as COVID was, it kind of gave me a different observance and something it's very nice. And I've incorporated it now that we're hopefully done with that, that I can still enjoy what I was doing during that time. It's so restricted. So,
Thanks for that. Thanks for that. Is there a favorite in all these services you've gone to? Is there a favorite song or favorite moment that you?
I love Lahadodis. I know about 30 of them. Because I was the music director in my sample in New Jersey, and we'd had wonderful, when people complained how why you did that way, you went the other way. And this whole music, they always do that. So
Yeah. I don't want to put her on the spot, but Susan Sosens raised kids here and is on the religious activity and sings and was a B'nai Mitzvah. Do you want to reflect on Shabbat at Bethel? I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you're okay to talk for a second.
Hi, I have been a member of Temple Bethel for 43 years, and I raised my children here. They were in elementary school, and they went from the day we got here. We started Sunday school, and they were bar mitzvah, they were confirmed. They had their children were my son that lives here. They had they had their bar mitzvahs here. They're my grandchildren, and I've been involved with the temple for forever. I was on the membership committee, and now I'm in the RAC committee, which is religious activities. I miss not going to in-person Shabbat when COVID came. To me, yes, I watched many online just because I couldn't get there, but being surrounded with community and feeling the warmth and everybody singing together. Of course, I'm big into singing since I'm in the choir, but just feeling everybody together. I like to sit with somebody who's I don't know, and if they're by themselves, I like to go and say to them, "Would you like somebody to sit with?" And many times they say yes, and I have made good friends from that. And other people just want to be alone, and that's fine. But you can do that at temple. You can go up to somebody at the Onik and they're standing by themselves, and you can just go and say hello. There's no standing on ceremony or having a hierarchy. It's just a community.
Beautiful. Is there one piece of liturgy that's your favorite? One song, one moment, one something?
There are many. I can't.
All right.
Dodi, as Philip said, but I love the Mechamocha. I love the Mishabera.
Okay.
And of course, Yartzeit, the Kaddish.
Beautiful. Yeah, Margaret, you had a hand up.
Well, I may have misunderstood the question. I thought you said it was when we go, is what memories we have of Shabbat.
Anything, memory of Shabbat or a piece of liturgy you love?
Well, when I go to services, I grew up classic reform in Virginia, and but I went to temple every Friday night with my father, and my grandparents were there, his parents, and I still, to this day, thank goodness, the second Michamoko starts to to be sung, especially if it's what I think the traditional Mika Moko. I just hear my grandmother and her inflection, how she would say it. And I just never want to forget that sound. That's what I hear on Shabbat.
Nice. Lovely. Yeah, I see iPhone with no name, and I apologize. You're
Anita. It's Anita. And Anita, you need to unmute.
Okay, I have a new iPhone, so I was never a regular Shabbat service goer. I went occasionally in various temples that I belonged to. But some of you know when my husband had dementia, he really enjoyed the music. And we started going every Friday night to, because he wanted to be there and listen to the music. He loved Laurie and Michelle singing and our cantors in New York when we used to travel up and back. So for me, after he died, I've just continued going to services because I enjoyed it so much. It separates the week from me. I think I love Hashkivenu and the melodies the most, but I do love the entire service.
Beautiful. Thank you. So some of the common threads were community, sort of intergenerational memories, and some particular prayers, which I will come back to. I might surprise you when I get to them, but we're going to hold on to these for a second. I had made notes. We will get back there. Meanwhile, let me share screen. As you know, any of you who've learned with me before, questions, thoughts, comments, please raise a hand. Rabbi will help me because when I'm sharing screen, it is harder for me to see what's going on. I may take something for granted that needs more explanation. So this is meant to be interactive, and part of our opening discussion was to get us in the mood to be interactive. So we're gonna talk about Shabbat in two clusters. One, themes of the day, and then liturgical elements. So we'll probably take this session and most of the next session on themes of the day, and then we'll move into specifically liturgical elements. Now, you can't get away from the liturgy in a particular way because it's based on Torah and so on. But that's the general path we're on. So let's look at the core themes and metaphors for Shabbat. So there are 5 principles: rest, joy, community, sacred time, and a taste of the world to come. Rest, menucha, joy, simcha. You may know the song Menucha v'simcha Orla Yehudim. Joy is also oneg. You hear oneg Shabbat and you think what? Food, right? Because the rabbis associated joy with food and beverage. So oneg Shabbat, the joy of food, community, sacred time, taste of the world to come, ein olam haba. The rabbis say that Shabbat is 1/60th, meaning just the slightest hint of a perfected world, of the world to come. So the Shabbat is a taste of something in the future we may aspire to. There are 2 mitzvot: observe and remember, at least as explicitly laid out in the 10 Commandments. We're going to spend time on this. Actually, both our sessions, or all of our sessions, a bit on the 2 mitzvot and the 2 remembrances, the first Shabbat and the Exodus. Wearing of fine clothing, white, or a garment of white, and this metaphor of wholeness, peace, perhaps a romance wedding. And when I wrote it here, romance wedding, I really pulled the punch. The mystics would say that Kabbalat Shabbat is the wedding of cosmic significance. And we're going to explore that down the road. The gift of an extra soul for the day, Neshama Yetera, and angels of blessing, as what we talk about when we sing Shalom Aleichem. Anything need clarifying yet or comment? Okay, so this is Shabbat in the Ten Commandments in Exodus. Zachor Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho, sheshet yamim tavod v'asita k'malachtecha. This is part of the traditional Shabbat morning kiddush. So most of us are familiar with singing V'shamru B'nei Yisrael et Shabbat in the traditional ark. Then there's this paragraph, and then the Borei Pri Hagafen. Although some traditions do skip this paragraph as well and go from V'shamru to Borei Pri Hagafen. Let's look at it in English. So there's two questions I'm looking at here. What's the mitzvah, meaning the specific commandment, and what's the rationale given? Anyone wanna hazard? Susan has a hand up.
Well, it's the creation of the world. It's 6 days. God labored and created the world, and on the seventh day he rested, and therefore commands us to do the same.
Okay, so that's the rationale given. For in 6 days the Eternal made the heaven and earth. But what's the commandment here?
To observe, to observe.
Actually, that's the commandment in Deuteronomy.
No.
It's right there on the screen. Remember the Sabbath day.
Different.
Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho. In this iteration of the Ten Commandments, the mitzvah, if you will, is to remember. The way one does it is you shall not do any work. And the rationale is, for in 6 days, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, it's a bit of a simplified question, because Shabbat is really a set of mitzvot, right? Like oneg, like menucha, doing and not doing in the form of having a festive meal, going to services, not doing in the form of refraining from work. So a fairer question might have been, what do we see when we compare the Ten Commandments in Exodus versus in Deuteronomy? But from a pedagogical perspective, the question was important, because we have to see that there's a mitzvah and a rationale and an instruction or a method. So let's look at Deuteronomy, which Susan previewed for us. Shamor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho ka'asher siva Adonai Elohecha Adonai Anan. So what's the difference here? Go for it. Oops, go. Oops, go for it.
So one is to remember, and one is to observe. Yes, I know this from going to Torah study for many years. Remembering, you can remember something without observing it. But if you observe it, you have to remember it in order to observe it.
Oh, I think that's a good start. We're going to go a little further than that, Susan. That's a great start. So there's another difference we need to highlight. To remember versus observe is the mitzvah. What's the rationale here?
In order to keep it holy. No.
What's the rationale? Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that the eternal you God set you free with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the eternal your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So we have two different commandments, remember and observe, and two different rationales, creation and the Exodus. Margaret has a hand up.
Okay, so my rationale is, of course you have to remember, but just remembering something is not enough. You have to do something about it. It's action. And I think that's our religion, is action. It's not faith-based, it's about doing. So I feel like just remembering doesn't do it. You have to actually observe.
I think that's a beautiful midrash. A beautiful midrash. Remembering leads to observing. And if we're going to be sort of critical Torah scholars, we're going to say the Torah didn't have to give us the Ten Commandments twice, didn't have to give us two different rationales, and didn't have to use two different words to describe the what of the Shabbat. So maybe there's something about remember that's different than observe. So let me answer the question, unless anybody wants to try to take a different approach to remember and observe. Let me tease that out a little bit. Anybody want to hazard into the deep water here? Okay. So remember is associated with creation. What are we being asked to remember? The Sabbath day, the one and only Sabbath day that only existed ever once in history, the actual day that God ceased creation. The only way to keep that Sabbath alive is to remember that God rested on the seventh day. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. For in 6 days, God created the heaven and earth. The remember part is not, as we think about remembering, I gotta remember to get to shul by 7:45. It's remembering something in particular that God wants us to remember. And that's sort of the structure of that paragraph. And the structure of this paragraph is the one in Deuteronomy is observe the Sabbath day every week, the one that comes every week after the next, exactly as you said it, Margaret, and exactly as you said it, Susan, with our actions, with our thoughts, with our freedom to observe Shabbat, we make the choice. And this choice we get to make because we were liberated from bondage. And so we remember the original Sabbath day to keep it holy, and we observe the Sabbath day with our freedom, with our right to choose the way we serve God, which we got because God freed us from the land of Egypt. So they're actually rather than one leading to the other, there's two commandments here. And in part, that's why a lot of our liturgy harkens back to the beginning of creation. In particular, let me just stop there and see if there are questions or comments on that particular piece, because it's pretty profound that the day God rested stays holy only when we remember that took place in our history, the history of humanity. Okay, I'll push forward then if I don't see any comments or so this is the first mention, the actual first mention of Shabbat in Torah. And there are two observations about this. There's something that's here that's very, very curious. And there's something that's not here that's even more curious. This is a hard one. It's a tricky one. Was somebody jumping in? So
Susan, are you trying to speak or?
Well, it doesn't mention, this particular passage does not mention all the works of creation, just said that God had completed the work. I don't know whether that was what you were looking for.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, we have all of the paragraphs before each of the days come. This
Right.
is, so the sixth day ends, and chapter 2 of Genesis begins with this. So let me give you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is this we have two creation stories, and does this apply to both of them?
Oh, great question. I never thought about it that way. Because the second creation story is really more about the creation of like man and woman created separately versus together. But that's a great question. You know what it makes me think about? Because I'm teaching jealousy tonight to 8th graders, and I'm talking about the story of Cain and Abel. And, you know, like Shabbat is supposed to be such this time of perfection where we're the image of God, and almost like devolves, where you go from like this first Shabbat mention, which is very early on. Then the second Shabbat, I'm trying to remember if after Eve is created from Adam's rib, if Shabbat is talked about before the apple or the fruit, and then it's funny, and then it devolves into Cain murdering Abel. So it's almost like you can never attain this Shabbat of the first Shabbat, because like so much comes in. You know, it's like you wear a white pair of pants and then they're dirty by the end of the day. Like you just can't. They'll never stay white. And it's almost like this. I have a Torah in front of me. I'll look while we're learning. But that's a great question, Susan. If it's like right there on the heels of the second creation story.
So it's in between. There is some midrash about where Adam HaRishon, the first Adam, might have been when the first Shabbat took place, and that gets into some of the Havdalah practices. There is no explicit discussion of Adam v'Chava, Adam and Eve, celebrating Shabbat in Genesis. I think Midrash takes it, some Midrash takes that for granted. This and we're sort of drifting away from Shabbat into sort of Torah study, which is fine. But if you think about the first story of creation as anthropology, and the second story of creation as psychology, or they're actually illuminating different aspects of human nature. But let's save the sort of the Torah discussion and drill back toward Shabbat. So the thing that's tricky here is there are two words that you would expect only one or the other to appear in this text. Vayvarach Elohim et Yom HaShvi'i vaykadesh oto, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Well, if it's blessed, isn't it holy? And if it's holy, isn't it blessed? In other words, why does the Torah need to use both words? What's it teaching us when it tells us both words? Margaret, you have a thought?
Well, you can bless somebody. You can bless. That depends on your meaning of bless. Is it always a positive thing, or could be negative thing? I don't know.
Well, this is God blessing. This is God blessing. This isn't an average Joe blessing.
I mean, it could be a curse. I don't know. Anyhow, making something holy is an elevation. And I think you can bless something that doesn't necessarily ascribe to that. I don't know. But you can bless things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be holy. That's why I think it's saying that twice. I mean, saying it like that. Doesn't necessarily become holy just because it's been blessed. Opinion.
I would suggest that if God blesses something, it achieves an elevated status.
Okay.
I'm just going to put that out there as an idea. What the rabbis do is they're not looking to smooth over the bumps. They're actually looking to find if there's extra meaning in the bump. And there's a huge bump here for them. If we're being told that two things are happening in this place. And this is going to end up being part of our cliffhanger for next week. And Margaret, you're going to keep me honest next time about justifying why I said this way. But we still haven't identified the thing that's missing from here. And there's something missing from here, and it's technical. In other words, again, we're being rabbinic Torah Sherlock Holmeses here.
Is it creative work? Is that what it is?
We've got all that in the 6 days before. This is the seventh day. So there's no creative work here because God completed the work, right? So we got that's, but there's something that, let me rephrase the question, that happens every other day of creation except this day? Susan.
Well, it says that that God ceased from all creative work. In other words, everything that God was going to do had already been accomplished.
The answer isn't on this page. You cannot find it here.
I thought you were trying.
There's something about this day that's different than any other day of the week. So you're gonna have to remember the other days of the week.
Things were happening, and here it's things were happening.
How does every day of creation end?
The sunrise and the sunset.
No, and God blessed
And
it.
it was evening and there was morning.
There was morning, right.
But there's no evening and no morning in Shabbat. There's simply the description of Shabbat, and then we move on. There's something here about this day that doesn't get anchored in time in that same way. It is, in fact, the combination of these two things that are going to lead us, the rabbis, to conclude that on Shabbat we get gifted. This is the spoiler maybe, or the preview for next week. We get gifted a neshama yetera. We get gifted a special soul for Shabbat.
I saw that on the list and I didn't know what that meant.
Well, we're gonna get there. We're gonna talk about neshama yetera next week. Our rhythm was a little slowed this week, which is fine. I think this is a lovely breaking point. I want to say though, this paragraph by Chulu in the traditional Friday night liturgy is said 3 times. It's so important. They want to make sure that no one misses it. So it's in the Mari, the evening service tefillah. There's a very special reader's repetition of the tefillah that isn't done in the
Reform
typically, but it's done, in Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities all over the world, non-reform. So it's repeated a second time, and then it's the introduction to the Kiddush. When we say the blessing over the wine, this paragraph of everything is not to be missed. And we will, this is another teaser, we will get to that as well. We will next week, we will talk about Neshama Yetera. We'll talk about angels of forgiveness. And perhaps we'll get to, well, maybe I'll jump to one slide while we have a moment, because it's a nice siyum. It's a nice way to close this out.
You're not frozen to us. You've frozen a little bit a couple times watching you, but yeah.
Okay. Am I sharing?
Yes.
All right. So what I want to do is show you this slide. So this paragraph by Chulu, Rava, this is in Masechet Shabbat in the Talmud, says that an individual who prays on Shabbat must recite Vayachulu. Anyone who prays this paragraph or recites this verse, it's as ascribed to that person. If that person was a partner with God in the entire act of creation. This gets to the true importance of remembering the original Sabbath day to make it holy. If I remember that first Sabbath day, I am making myself God's partner in the creation, in finishing creation. And there's another midrash, which I did not put here, which actually says that one who recites the Vayachulu is forgiven of sin.
Every Shabbat or all 3 times?
It doesn't. It's metaphoric.
It's just saying it, right.
It's metaphoric. The idea is to impress upon us our relationship to God includes remembering the actual first Shabbat.
Fabulous. I think that's a great place to end. It's 1:00. And we'll think especially hard about Vayachulu this Friday night when we say it. Alden, thank you so much. Feel better. We'll see everyone. Double check the link for next week. I'm not sure if it's the same link or a different link. So just make sure you click on whatever temple. For Alden, I'll connect with you directly. I meant for everyone else. Go by the link that's in the weekly email from Temple or on the website. We'll make sure everyone gets on here. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Alden, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
I was more chipper for you.
You'll be great. You were perfect. Shabbat shalom. Later in the week. Take care. Bye-bye.